They say democracy is the voice of the people. But in reality, some of the most important decisions shaping nations aren't made in parliaments, Congress halls, or cabinet rooms. They are made in places the public never sees: quiet dinners, private conferences, encrypted messages, and boardrooms high above the streets. Here is the paradox. The wealthiest individuals in society rarely shout. Their power works because it whispers. To understand how billionaires shape governments without ever appearing on a ballot, we must start with a simple truth. In every era of history, wealth has acted as a form of political gravity. It pulls leaders closer. It bends systems. And it reshapes nations, slowly, quietly, inevitably. But the modern world has turned this silent influence into a refined science. It wasn't always like this. If we travel back to the early industrial age, the late 19th and early 20th centuries, wealthy industrialists like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan didn't bother hiding their impact. Rockefeller built monopolies so powerful the U.S. government was forced to invent antitrust laws just to contain him. J.P. Morgan bailed out the American banking system with his personal fortune. Carnegie's steel empire supplied the infrastructure that rewired a continent. Back then, influence was direct, visible, even confrontational. But as democratic institutions grew stronger and as citizens became more skeptical, the wealthy adapted. They traded overt control for covert leverage. Public confrontation became private persuasion, and political influence moved from the open battlefield to the quiet backroom. The first big shift came with the rise of campaign finance. Elections grew more expensive. Media coverage expanded. Political messaging professionalized. Suddenly, running a campaign meant raising millions, sometimes billions of dollars. And that dependence created an opening. When you control the funding of a politician, you don't need to control the politician. You simply control which politicians survive. In the United States, modern campaign finance systems evolved to allow deep-pocketed donors to contribute through multiple channels. Political action committees, super PACs, independent expenditures, and dark money networks that conceal donors entirely. In Europe, wealthy business leaders fund parties indirectly through think tanks, advisory groups, and targeted philanthropy. In developing nations, oligarchs funnel money through media control, business patronage, and informal agreements that keep political elites dependent on private wealth. But this is only the surface. The deeper influence happens long before an election, even long before a law is drafted. It happens in the shaping of ideas. One of the most powerful tools in modern political influence is the think tank. From Washington to Brussels to London to Singapore, elite-funded research institutions quietly shape national policies. They craft white papers, advise ministers, produce statistical models, and frame public narratives. To the public, they appear as academic institutions. In reality, many operate as intellectual vehicles for the wealthy donors behind them. Ideas become policies. Policies become laws. And laws shape markets. When you influence the idea, you influence everything downstream. Yet the most silent form of influence is neither money nor policy. It is access. A billionaire does not wait weeks to schedule a meeting. They don't stand in lines or navigate bureaucracy. Their calls are answered. Their messages are read immediately. Their presence changes the atmosphere of any room they enter. Access means information. Information means advantage. Advantage means power. But influence isn't just vertical between billionaires and politicians. It is horizontal between billionaires and other billionaires. Closed global networks like the World Economic Forum in Davos, the Sun Valley Conference, the Milken Institute gatherings, elite. Philanthropy circles and private equity retreats bring together the most powerful people on Earth in environments far from public scrutiny. Here, alliances form. Initiatives are born. Agendas synchronize across borders. Governments react to these networks, sometimes willingly, sometimes unknowingly. The modern billionaire also influences through media. Owning a newspaper, a television network, or a digital platform gives them the power to shape public perception. Media ownership is not just a business. It's a shield, a megaphone, and a negotiation tool. Coverage can be softened or sharpened. Narratives can be encouraged or suppressed. Public attention can be steered or distracted. Even without owning media, billionaires strategically fund online influencers, research groups, and cultural institutions to reinforce narratives beneficial to their interests. But perhaps the most underestimated weapon is philanthropy. Philanthropy presents billionaires as generous saviors. It creates goodwill. It earns invitations. It dissolves criticism. Yet strategic philanthropy often has political implications. Foundations shape educational curricula, public health priorities, climate strategies, and international development agendas. In some countries, philanthropic initiatives operate alongside or even above government programs. When a billionaire solves problems the state cannot solve, the line between public and private power blurs. But the quietest form of influence, the one almost invisible, is market leverage. In a globalized economy, some billionaires control assets so large that governments depend on them. A sovereign wealth fund can destabilize a market by shifting billions in minutes. A private tech company can compromise national security through a single data leak. A multinational corporation can influence foreign policy through supply chain pressure. Governments cannot afford to alienate individuals whose economic footprint rivals entire nations. And so influence grows not through threats, but through interdependence. This is the silent architecture of modern power. Not kings or emperors, not military commanders, but private individuals whose wealth bends the trajectory of nations. So the question becomes, if democratic governments are meant to serve the people, what happens when the people with the most influence are the ones never elected? The answer lies in understanding the mechanisms behind this influence, the channels, the incentives, the vulnerabilities, and how they evolve to shape our world today. The story of silent influence becomes clearer when we examine the evolution of power in the 21st century, an era where wealth doesn't just buy luxury, but leverage. The modern billionaire controls three things more valuable than money: data, infrastructure, and time. Data reveals human behavior. Infrastructure shapes national capability. Time determines who acts fastest when the world changes. Governments, surprisingly, struggle with all three. Tech billionaires gather oceans of data daily. Messages, searches, movements, purchases, preferences. Some companies understand citizens better than their own governments do. This informational asymmetry creates a new form of political leverage, predictive power. If you can predict behavior, you can shape behavior. And if you can shape behavior, you can shape elections. Even when tech giants claim neutrality, their algorithms decide what billions of people see every day, not through ideology, but through engagement metrics designed to maximize attention. Attention is influence. Influence is political capital, but infrastructure may be an even greater tool. In the past, governments built the system society depended on: roads, power grids, communication networks. Today, much of that infrastructure is privately owned. Cloud computing supports national security. Private satellites provide global connectivity. Logistics networks move essential goods across continents. Fintech systems route trillions of dollars daily. If a critical infrastructure is owned by one corporation, that corporation becomes a geopolitical actor. The line between government interest and private interest dissolves. But nothing symbolizes modern influence more than the ability to control time. A billionaire can act instantly, moving money, deploying teams, launching campaigns, acquiring assets. Governments move slowly because democracies require debate, consensus, legislation. Speed becomes power. Power becomes influence. And influence becomes silent governance. Yet despite these mechanisms, the influence of billionaires is not always malicious or manipulative. Sometimes, it emerges from the failures of the state itself. When governments are too slow to solve problems, inequality, climate change, healthcare, education, the ultra-wealthy intervene. Foundations build schools. Tech firms develop vaccine platforms. Private companies rescue failing infrastructures. But every solution comes with a trade-off. When billionaires fix public problems, they gain private influence. And influence accumulates quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. Sometimes the influence is subtle, a suggestion during a private meeting, a donation strategically timed, a think tank paper framed just right. Sometimes it's structural, an entire industry shaped around the preferences of a small elite. And sometimes it becomes geopolitical. Across the world, billionaires negotiate directly with heads of state. A tech founder can influence national cybersecurity policy. A mining tycoon can influence resource legislation. A hedge fund manager can influence currency strategies. A media mogul can influence elections. These are not conspiracy theories. They are the documented realities of modern political economy. But the most powerful influence billionaires wield is psychological. When a billionaire speaks, the world listens. When they predict the future, markets shift. When they endorse a policy, politicians respond. When they invest in an idea, society treats it as inevitable. Even silence becomes a message. A paused investment, an unanswered call, a delayed decision. Power doesn't always show itself. Often, it hides behind what doesn't happen. And this brings us to the core question: what does this silent influence mean for democracy? Some argue that billionaire influence is simply a byproduct of success in a free market. Others see it as a form of private governance, a parallel system of decision-making that operates without accountability. But both perspectives miss the real truth. Governments and billionaires are becoming interdependent. Billionaires need governments for protection, stability, and legitimacy. Governments need billionaires for innovation, capital, and speed. This mutual dependency creates a gray zone where influence flows both ways. Sometimes it is productive, accelerating progress. Sometimes it is dangerous, concentrating power. Always it is silent. The world's most influential billionaires do not need to overthrow governments. They simply need to guide them. With a meeting, a whisper, a donation, a partnership, a policy suggestion disguised as philanthropy. And as long as inequality continues to grow, the influence of the ultra-wealthy will grow with it. Because power, like nature, abhors a vacuum. And wherever governments fail to act, someone else will. So the final question is not how billionaires influence governments. The real question is, who governs the future, states or individuals wealthy enough to shape them? Until we answer that, the silent influence will continue, not as conspiracy, but as the architecture of the modern world.